Welcome to Tennessee's at-home learning series for math. Today's lesson is for all our 7th graders out there, though all children are welcome to tune in. Today's lesson is the 10th in our series. My name is Kayla Anderson, and I'm an 8th grade math teacher at Rocky Fork Middle School in the Rutherford County School System. I'm so excited to be your teacher for this lesson. Welcome to my virtual classroom. If you didn't see our previous lessons, you can find them on the Tennessee Department of Education's website at www.tn.gov/education. If you don't already have the student packet for today's lesson, you can find that at www.tn.gov/education. You can still tune into today's lesson if you haven't watched any of our previous lessons, but it might be more fun if you go back and watch those first, since we'll be discussing things today that we've learned previously. Today we will be learning about adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers in mathematics. Before we get started, to participate fully in today's lesson, you will need paper, pencil, and a surface to write on. Okay, let's begin. Let's review using the strategy of a number line to subtract. So our first problem, what is 2 5/10 minus 4 5/10? Take a minute, draw a number line, and come up with your answer. Okay, so here I have a number line for us. You should start at 2 5/10, which is 2 1/2, which is here. Did you remember that subtracting on a number line means to move to the left? How many places? You are correct. We are moving 4 1/2 spaces to the left. So 1, 2, 3, 4 1/2. Did you land at -2? Great job. So 2 5/10 minus 4 5/10 equals -2. And we just saw on a number line how subtracting means that we will move to the left. Remember that we've also talked in this series about the phrase adding the opposite. And so here we would leave this first addend as 2 5/10. We are going to add the opposite of the second addend. The second addend is 4 5/10. So the opposite of that is -4 5/10. And then when we add 2 5/10 plus -4 5/10, we still come up with -2. So there's a review of our strategy of adding the opposite, and there's a review of how to use the number line. Let's practice the strategies that we have learned to add and subtract positive and negative numbers. What is -8 6/10 minus -5 4/10? Show your work. Go ahead and do that now. I'll pause to give you some time, and then we'll check our answer together. Okay, I am going to add the opposite. So just like we talked about a second ago, after we reviewed how to do that subtraction on the number line, I'm going to add the opposite. So I'm leaving this first addend as -8 6/10. I'm going to add the opposite of the second addend. The second addend is -5 4/10. The opposite is +5 4/10. We've also discussed decomposing some numbers so that we can combine opposites to make our adding and subtracting a little bit easier. So I'm going to decompose -8 6/10. Think about how you think we could decompose this number to create some opposites to make our adding and subtracting easier. Well, -8 6/10 equals -5 4/10 plus -3 2/10. So if we ignore the rest of our expression for now, I have not changed the value here. I've just decomposed 8 6/10 into -5 4/10 plus -3 2/10, so that this will help me out with my adding and creating some opposites. So to finish out the rest of the expression, I also have plus 5 4/10. So when I add these, what is my final answer going to be? I hope you said -3 2/10. What's the benefit of this strategy and how did this help us out? Well, -5 4/10 plus 5 4/10 are opposites of one another. And when we add those opposites together, they equal 0. And then we have 0 plus -3 2/10, or just -3 2/10. This made the addition simpler, much like when you were first adding and subtracting whole numbers. Okay, let's try another one. Here's our next problem. -1/4 plus 2 1/2 minus -3/8. What strategy that we've learned this week could we use to solve this problem? Great. First, we could add the opposite. Let's write our new expression. Go ahead and write your new expression once we've added the opposite. Okay, so -1/4 plus 2 1/2. We're going to add the opposite of this second addend. Currently, it's -3/8. The opposite of -3/8 is +3/8. So there's our new expression once we have used adding the opposite. Okay, what do we do next? Right, we need a common denominator. Why don't you go ahead and write these fractions and mixed numbers with a common denominator? All right, so our common denominator is 8. 4 times 2 gives me 8, so 1 times 2 is 2. So -1/4 is the same as -2/8. Okay? 2 times 4 is 8, so 1 times 4 is 4. So 2 1/2 is the same as 2 4/8. And then we already had a denominator of 8 for our last addend. What strategy could we use now? Could we use properties and add 2 4/8 plus 3/8 to get 2 7/8? So let's go ahead and add those together. 2 4/8 plus 3/8 is 2 7/8. Now our expression looks like this: -2/8 plus 2 7/8. What would our final answer be? You are correct. 2 5/8. Good work. Let's think about determining the sign of an answer without working the problem. This will help us know if our answers are reasonable. Without calculating, explain how you can tell if the value of this expression negative 9 and 45 hundredths minus negative 1 and 72 hundredths minus 2 and 53 hundredths is positive or negative. So without calculating that, explain how you can tell if it is positive or negative. How can we decide? We can rewrite the expression by adding the opposite. Let's do that and see if that gives us any insight on the sign of the answer. Rewrite this expression on your paper by adding the opposite. I'll pause while you do that, and then we can check to see if you did it correctly. Okay, did you get negative 9 and 45 hundredths plus 1 and 72 hundredths plus negative 2 and 53 hundredths? Great job. Here we were subtracting, so now we're adding the opposite. We were subtracting, now we're adding the opposite. If we start at 0 on a number line, we will go left, which is negative, more than 11 units. Why would we go left more than 11 units? Well, when we put negative 9 and 45 hundredths and negative 2 and 53 hundredths together, that's more than 11 units. So if you're thinking about a number line, if we were starting at 0, we would go left more than 11 units. Then we're going to move to the right less than 2 units because this is less than 2. This tells us that our answer should be negative because when we put these two together, they're more than 11. If we move to the left more than 11 and then move to the right less than 2, our answer is going to be negative. Determining if our answer is reasonable will help us to check our answers. Let's try one of these with fractions. Would the answer 2 and 1/4 minus 3 and 1/8 minus negative 4 and 1/2 be positive or negative? Write down your guess and then we'll check together. Did you say positive? Let's think about why. If we add the opposites, add the opposite, add the opposite, this 4 and 1/2 becomes positive. Adding the opposite, this 4 and 1/2 becomes positive. If we use the properties of addition and we add the positive numbers 2 and 1/4 and 4 and 1/2 together, that gives us more than 6. Because that positive 6 is greater than the negative 3 and 1/8, the answer will be positive. Let's use our strategies and what we know about determining reasonableness to solve some problems. I want you to try each step on your own, then we will work the step together. Do not be afraid of making a mistake. That is how we learn. Also, before you start the problem, think about whether we expect the answer to be positive or negative. Okay, here's our first problem. Negative 3 and 1/2 plus 4 minus 1/3. Let's think about the sign of the answer to this expression. Without calculating, determine if the answer is positive or negative. Negative 3 1/2 would be 3 1/2 units to the left of 0. Adding 4 would move us 4 units to the right, so we are now on the positive side of 0. Where would we be? Right, we would be at positive 1/2. Subtracting 1/3 will move us back toward 0. Do we go below 0? How do you know? Since 1/3 is less than 1/2, we will still be on the positive side of 0. Our answer to this expression will be positive. You are really getting good at reasoning with signs and with numbers. What would your answer to this expression be? Take a minute to finish calculating it. Okay, negative 3 1/2 plus 4 is 1/2. So now we have 1/2 minus 1/3. We need a common denominator. 1/2 is the same as 3/6, and 1/3 is the same as 2/6. 3/6 take away 2/6 is 1/6. Did you get that too? Great. Let's try another. Remember, make a prediction of whether the answer is positive or negative, and then work the problem to get the answer. Here's our next problem. Negative 2 6/10 minus negative 3 5/10 minus 4 7/10. All right, go ahead and get started. Let's think through the problem. First, when we think about whether our answer is positive or negative, what are you thinking? I hope you said negative. I'm going to go ahead and add the opposite to think about what these numbers look like once we've added the opposite. So negative 2 6/10 plus 3 5/10 plus negative 4 7/10. On a number line, we would start at negative 2 6/10. Then we would cross over 0 when we move to the right and add 3 5/10. Then we're going to cross back over 0 when we're subtracting or adding the negative 4 7/10. So the answer to this one should be negative. Next, what was your answer? Well, negative 2 6/10 plus 3 5/10 is 9/10. 9/10 plus negative 4 7/10 is negative 3 8/10. How'd you do? Awesome. Let's try this one. Remember to make a prediction of whether the answer is positive or negative, and then work the problem to get the answer. 3 1/2 plus 1 minus 2 1/2 minus 2. I'll wait while you think about it. Did you guess positive or negative? Neither? How does that happen? Right, the answer is 0. Let's do a think aloud to check our work. 3 1/2 is to the right of 0. Adding 1 puts us further to the right. Where would we be? Right, 4 1/2. Subtracting 2 1/2 takes us to the left. Where would we be now? Right, now we're at 2. Negative 2 takes us 2 places to the left, or subtracting 2 takes us 2 places to the left. Where are we? Right, we are at 0. Great job. You were right. It's neither positive nor negative. Let's look at the math behind this. 3 1/2 plus 1 minus 2 1/2 minus 2. Well, 3 1/2 plus 1 is 4 1/2 minus 2 1/2 minus 2. If I go ahead and add the opposite, I'm going to have 4 1/2 plus negative 2 1/2 plus negative 2. Well, I can keep my 4 1/2 here, and remember that I can add negative 2 1/2 plus negative 2 to equal negative 4 1/2. When I add 4 1/2 plus negative 4 1/2, it equals 0. Don't forget that properties of operations are very helpful when adding and subtracting rational numbers. I'm going to give you 2 problems to try all on your own, and then we will check your work. Here's your first problem. Negative 1 4/10 minus negative 2 6/10 minus 1 2/10 minus negative 1 8/10. Okay. Here's your second problem. 2 3/4 minus 3 3/4 plus 4 plus negative 4 1/4. Don't forget to think about whether your answers will be positive or negative and use the strategies that we've been discussing. I'm going to pause and give you time to work both problems. Okay, I would have added the opposite here. So adding the opposite, adding the opposite, and adding the opposite. And then once you have this new expression for number 1, did you get that it's going to be positive and that your answer is 1 8/10? Great work. Here, again, I would have used adding the opposite, so 2 3/4 plus -3 3/4 plus 4 plus -4 1/4. For this one, did you get negative and that your answer is -1 1/4? Fantastic work. Great work today, 7th grade. Today we reviewed addition and subtraction strategies to simplify expressions and solve problems with a focus on checking the reasonableness of our answers. You really did a great job. After this video, you will have some problems to practice on your own. I will show you the independent practice problems now, or you can find them in the student practice for this lesson posted on our website, www.tn.gov/education. Notice that the instructions say to first make a prediction about whether the answer is positive or negative. Then you're going to work the problem to get the answer. I'll pause while you look over and maybe write down these problems. Good luck and do your best. I enjoyed reviewing addition and subtraction strategies to simplify expressions and thinking about the reasonableness of answers with you. Thank you for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson in Tennessee's At Home Learning series. Bye!